Hello and welcome to BharatShakti.in. I'm Brigadier Chatterjee. We are going to be talking about theaterization in the Indian context today. The joint fielding of the forces of both the Navy, of the Army, as also the Air Force is essential to optimize our combat capability. There's no doubt about it. It holds good all through the world and it holds good for us also. However, in spite of having a CDS now in place, there seems to be some sort of a slippage in getting onto theatre commands. That is the theme that I will pursue. And with me, our guest is Nitin Gokhale, who comes back home for this kind of a discussion once in a while with me.
Yeah. Thanks, Brigadier Chatterjee. This is an important topic, and I think the recent Combined Commanders Conference in Bhopal would have discussed this. My information is that it was one of the major discussion points for the 3 days that all the senior commanders were there. So I suppose it's a good time as any to deliberate on what exactly happened there.
Right, I can quite understand. It must be one of the most important issues to be discussed in that kind of that level of conference. But Nitin, just to get everybody on the same page, if you can give us the structure as it's existing now, too many commands, whatever way you look at it, can we have their distribution a little more in detail?
Sure. So I'm sure many of our viewers already know it, but it's good to recap how diverse and how I would say diffused the military structure in Indian context is right now. The Army has 7 commands, the Air Force has 7 commands, the Navy has 3 commands, and then there are 3 tri-service entities. One is the Andaman Nicobar Command headquartered in Port Blair. There is the SFC, which is the Strategic Forces Command, looks after the nuclear aspects or nuclear strength of India. And there is, of course, the headquarter IDS, which is now subsumed into the Department of Military Affairs. So it can't be called a command really, but it's a separate entity or a vertical which is there. So there is a surfeit of command and control structures. So as I said, 7 army commands. Out of that, one of course is a training command. Similarly with the Navy, there is a training command. With the Air Force, there is a separate training command. So 17 commands, single service commands, and then the other 3. Which means that more or less all the 3 services have been working since India's independence, and over the years separate commands have been added to the structure. The layer has just kept increasing and getting complicated, which means they work in silos in their own sphere. There is hardly any compatibility in communications, for instance. The Air Force today cannot talk to the Army directly through a common communication network. Neither can the Navy. And therefore you can imagine the kind of coordination that is required. Even for the Combined Commanders Conference to be held in Bhopal, the lead service was the Navy, the Western Naval Command of the Navy. And it had to go to Bhopal and send its personnel to coordinate with the 21 Corps, which is based in Bhopal, to do whatever it had to do. And it came under the Southern Command of the Army. So you can imagine the kind of chaos that continues, and therefore the need for what people call theatre commands or joint commands going forward.
And Nitin, taken your point taken, but let me also remind you of one small important issue perhaps.
Sure.
We won the 71 war with this kind of commands. Notwithstanding, I'm totally in agreement here with you of the requirement to pull them down and get them to combine.
That was 50 years ago, 51 years ago. No, it's 52 years ago, in fact, the 71 war, the last big war India fought. And remember, it happened because of the force of personalities. Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw, that time General Sam Manekshaw, Air Chief Marshal P.C. Lal, and Admiral S.M. Nanda. They had a good rapport, and of course the whole of nation approach worked in the liberation of East Pakistan. Remember also, I'm sure you have worked in the army after that. You have served in the army after that 71 war. So many commands were not there. In fact, I think the Air Force did not have so many commands.
No, even the Army didn't.
Even the Army didn't. So let's not go. You're right, absolutely. When it comes to the crunch, during a crisis, they do work together very well.
Together. That is the point.
That point has been taken. But
that is the point.
Let's not, just glorify that and say, okay, we don't need it.
No, I'm not glorifying. I quite accept your argument that there's a requirement of having cohesive commands with all the three services being part of it.
Absolutely.
And that's the only way to fight the battle.
Sure.
Right. There could be a lot of ideas about how this new setup is going to be after you merge the commands, etc.
Right.
What is the most favored setup, as much as you are aware of, as on date in terms of commands?
So let's look at what has happened in the past 3 years. Remember, the first Chief of Defence Staff was appointed on 1st January 2020. Gen Bipin Rawat, God bless his soul, is no longer with us. But he was tasked with forming or doing integration and jointness within the three services. And of course, take it to the final conclusion of having theatre commands. In those 2.5 years that he was, or 1.5 years that he was at the helm, he tried his best to accelerate, ram through some of the formation of a theatre command. Perhaps now, looking back, people are saying he held the wrong end of the stick. He should have created a consensus amongst the services first and then gone for it. So what he had thought that time was at least 4 commands. Western Command for the Western adversary, Northern Command for the China border, Eastern Command also for the China border mainly, a Maritime Command combining the current Eastern and Western naval commands based in Vizag and Mumbai respectively, and a Air Defence Command. This is what he had in mind. He had publicly spoken about it a number of times. Since his demise, since his death in the accident in December 2021, there was a gap in between for 7-8 months. There was no CDS. Then Anil Chauhan, the second CDS, was appointed only in October 2022. And since then, it's been 6 months. We haven't heard anything publicly from either the CDS or the three chiefs on what the possible rethink is there on the command. But like there's a saying that, many of these discussions don't remain very secret. At least some bits of it here and there do come out. So from the current understanding that I have after speaking to different people, the talk is about having 3 commands only, 3 joint theatre commands. One is the Western Theatre Command looking after the Western borders and the Western adversary. The Northern Command looking after the entire northern border, the Himalayan border with China. It can stretch from Ladakh in northwest to Arunachal in the east and carrying Uttarakhand and Sikkim in between. And also talking about looking at some of the Air Force assets in the hinterland. The Central Air Command, for instance, can be part of the Northern Command. Is again a discussion that is going on. Then there is the Maritime Command, which has remained constant. And these 3 are supposed to be the way forward. This is what the general consensus that has emerged apparently amongst the leadership of the 3 services and the CDS. And this is the ultimate aim towards which they are working, is what one hears from different people. How much of it is really going to be implemented, how much it can be implemented, nobody knows. But this is the current thinking as I understand.
What about the Strategic Command? And what about Andaman Nicobar?
So the Andaman Nicobar one hears contradictory things. Somebody says it will be subsumed in the Northern Command, which I don't know what is the logic there. There could be some reasoning there, I don't know. But logically it should be with the Maritime Theatre Command. That is what it is. And the Strategic Forces Command will remain outside the ambit of this, because that again has a nuclear command authority, which is controlled by the Prime Minister, through the National Security Advisor, and then there is the whole chain of that. That's a separate issue altogether. So I think this is where the current thinking is.
Okay. Now there would be some sort of a lack of meeting ground between the 3 services. It's happened in all countries. It's going to happen, and it is happening in our country also.
Sure.
And I think possibly Air Force is the one they feel they are being bled too hard in this kind of an environment. So if you can tell us what's the points of really dissonance between the 3 services in reaching this?
I don't know whether I would call it dissonance, but there is some logic and rational thinking behind the Air Force's objection as people understand it and as I understand it. that Air Force has time and again argued in the current context that we do not have enough assets to distribute it to every command separately.
So that's a fact.
That's a fact, and that I think is the reality which everyone must face. So, what the Air Force is saying is that let the assets, control of the assets remain with the Air Headquarters, and whenever required, we will switch. It's not a large, not a large country, and we don't have expeditionary ambitions like the Americans or
Definitely.
others. So, therefore, they can be switched from one theatre to the other whenever required. So, for instance, one argument goes from the Air Force is that if attack helicopters, say 2 squadrons are allocated to Western Theatre Command looking after the Pakistan border, and they're all there under the Western Theatre Commander. And if things start going wrong or things start hotting up in the Northern Command, will they just be twiddling their thumbs there in Western Command because they're not allocated to the Northern Command, is the question that the Air Force is raising. And that's where I think if at all you want to call it dissonance comes in. One example, for instance. But otherwise, I haven't heard in the last 6 months any real dissonance, any real differences. They're all coming to a agreement that we have to take it forward. That's the political direction. So therefore, a minimal structure, minimal understanding has to come in first, and then build on whatever the structure is understood to go ahead or go forward from there.
Like, one issue that is to be kept in view also as we progress towards theaterization, as we try and press the accelerator also, that we have a threat perception which is pretty live. You've got China, you've got on your western borders, you've got Pakistan, and none of them are friendly,
right,
in the least way. So perhaps a degree of stability has to be ensured when we do a transition, and there is a bit of tremor when you do a transition as big as this.
Right. Yeah, true. I think that the leadership will be very mindful of, I'm sure, and discussions have taken place in the past. How do you make this transformation, a very major transformation, without disturbing the current operational combat effectiveness of the 3 forces?
Yeah.
Has been the discussion. And I think there is some, again, a plan in place which says that to put structures in place for upcoming theatres or joint theatre commands, there should be a core team which can be formed from all the 3 services, led by a new post perhaps created, or the CISC being sidestepped to becoming the VCDS, Vice Chief of Defence Staff, who would lead the putting in place the nuts and bolts for the theatre commands, so that the operational effectiveness doesn't get affected at all, and therefore all the commands, 17 single service commands, continue to function as they are as things go on, even as simultaneously the theatre command work is going on.
Yeah.
Is one thought that I have heard.
Right. And another issue, perhaps connected a bit, then we have a new CDS now, like you yourself said. Now, we had a CDS earlier, also very fine gentleman.
Right.
But there would be certain amount of changes as we transit from one CDS to another CDS.
Right.
Way of thinking, way of approaching
Sure.
issue, etc. So what's the methodology of the new CDS?
So I think I wrote a piece on this, and I think we should give the link to that article,
Right. We'll do.
in the video
Will do.
itself, where I had mentioned the new approach, which is what I gathered from talking to different people, is that the current CDS sees this as a 3-step process.
Okay.
One is creating an enabling environment where discussion takes place in a very cordial and congenial manner between the 3 services, without rancor, without any anger, and practically, all aspects are taken care of. So that is what he is trying to do, and this is ephemeral in a way. You cannot quantify it, the way you create that enabling environment. That's what he is trying to do, and therefore we haven't heard contradictory, trashing each other kind of statements from any of the 3 services in the past 6 months or so. He's gone around Category A training establishments to speak to officers personally, as well as asked the 3 service chiefs to convey the message internally to the officer corps, to tell them where it is going, how they are planning, and how they are going about it. That's the second thing that he has done. The third is to look at how to first put in place joint training, joint planning, joint war fighting planning, and then finally logistics as well as procurements. This is what the up the ladder is trying to go, so that everything is put in place. And then from what I have heard from different people is that the current military leadership, including the CDS and the three service chiefs, they are not looking for a low-hanging fruit. They want to go for the toughest part of it, to create theatre commands, and then go down to the easier parts of theaterization, which is putting in place logistics nodes, also training facilities together wherever possible. Not every training facility can be put together, as you are aware. I mean, everybody has a different need. So that's what this is what the approach he has adopted, and it is something that we will perhaps come to know as things go from here.
Perhaps another issue is the political leadership. They're very much involved in this kind of a strategic issue for the forces. Now, possibly the timelines that they expected were much more tighter, much more shorter than what they're going to extend to now, the way you explain it.
Right.
Now, I hope the political leadership fully appreciates this particular issue.
I think this Combined Commanders Conference was very important in that context. I don't think anybody asked a direct question that when are you going to put theatre commands in place? But I think questions were asked about what has happened in these past 3 years, from January 2020 to January 2023. What has happened? So there again the explanation was that we lost 7-8 months in between, but some of the structures are in place. There's cross postings have started taking place between services, between civilians, MOD and DRDO. All of this has started. Small ways of even sending messages, optics as they call it, of taking officers as on the staff from a different service. All this is being thought about. Even attending, having contingents in Army Day parade from Navy and the Air Force, and vice versa. All those is being thought about. Those are very minor things, but the political leadership has been clearly told that perhaps those timelines that were suggested to General Rawat in the beginning when he was appointed the first CDS were impractical, and therefore give us more time, which I think is what I wrote in that piece again. It's between 15 and 20 months from now, which would mean about end of 2024 perhaps, or early 2025, which would be 5 years from the day first CDS was appointed, which I think is reasonable if you look at the experience of the world or other bigger militaries in creating joint theatre commands. Look at the US, look at how the UK did this in the late 80s. The Chinese took nearly 7-8 years. Of course, they're a big military creating theatre commands. So I think going by what we know and what is possible, it looks like end of 2024, early 2025 is the timeline the politicians have accepted and have said that this must be done effectively, must be done with a purpose, so that combat effectiveness has to be enhanced. The whole purpose is that, and then look at the savings and look at optimization of resources, both personnel as well as equipment.
And meanwhile, I suppose the CDS office will have to, like you've already said, focus on equipment induction so that it's compatible across the three services. Focus on logistics wherever commonality can be found, and focus possibly on training. Any more comments on?
Exactly. I mean, the whole idea of this creation of Department of Military Affairs, CDS, is one of the key mandates given to the CDS at the beginning, and we always need to revisit that 10 or 15 points that were given in that press note, was integration, avoiding duplication of procurement, where each service may want their own air force. For instance, there was an old joke that the Army wants its own air force, the Navy already has its own air force. So
the American Marine Corps
has its own air force, but we are not Americans anyway. We don't have an expeditionary thing. So therefore, that is what the idea is, and hopefully the plans are on. And I think the long-term integrated perspective plan (LTIPP) is now focused on avoiding duplication, avoiding getting the same equipment at different timelines and at different cost as far as the three services are concerned. So I think they are on the right track.
Right, Nitin, I think we'll call it off here. And thanks a lot for having visited home.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to come and talk on.
Come back home with.
Yeah, come back home. Homecoming is always good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, viewers. Thanks for joining us on BharatShakti.in. We'll come out with such interesting programs. Do log in and let us know in case there be any subject that you want us to take up for discussions. Thank you.